Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work and life in a more successful and sustainable way. As mums, there's probably not a week goes by that we don't worry about the well-being of our children in some way, shape or form. But 2020 has been the year that worrying about our children's well-being has reached a whole new level. Things like, how are they coping in lockdown? Are they getting too much screen time? Are they becoming too isolated? What if they get the virus? How will they cope with the transition back to school? Are the social distancing rules worrying them? And the list goes on. And I don't know about you, but at times I felt like I've needed more support and resources to navigate some of these worries. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Dr. Sarah Taylor. When I was introduced to Sarah through a friend, I was quite literally blown away by her. Sarah's expertise, knowledge and approach to child psychology is phenomenal. And I knew that I had to get her on this podcast to share her unique insights and methodology with you. Sarah is a clinical psychologist specialising in supporting children, but she actually started out a career as a teacher and a deputy head in a primary and special needs education establishments. And Sarah spent several years extensively researching the combined roles that science, psychology, and physical reflexes have on mental health. And this was born out of a desire to identify the causes behind a well-publicised fact that an increasing number of children today are experiencing anxiety, depression, and difficulty attending and cooperating and controlling behaviour at school and in the home. And Sarah recognised that there's a real need for a solution that's more sensitively attuned to a child's psychological needs. And interestingly, Sarah concluded that a large proportion of children will not noticeably benefit from talking therapies, which was a whole new kind of revelation for me. And this is really due to the stresses and pressure of modern life. Most children do not have fundamental behavioural problems. Rather, these are often symptoms of the reality that children need to emotionally regulate but don't know how to. And that's what Sarah's going to be sharing with us today, because she's created a unique approach and an assessment programme to really meet this challenge, and it's called the Calm Brain Approach. And it provides an easily accessible psychological intervention that can be used by and benefit everybody that uses it. And I know that you're going to love what Sarah has to share. So let's dive in. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I know you've got such kind of richness of experience and expertise that my listeners will just want to hear.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet. I'm very pleased to be here.
So I wanted to start our conversation really with your journey, because I'm always fascinated about how people come to do the work that they do. So could you share a little bit about how you came to do this work?
As a clinical psychologist, yeah. So, it's been quite a long journey, really. I started off after my degree. I went and worked in a residential children's home with children with really complex behavioural and learning needs, and just was completely and utterly out of my depth. And trained to become a teacher there. And so we had these adorable kids, but I just wasn't able to do anything with them, really. I couldn't manage their behaviour. So I started becoming interested in psychology, and that was my journey, really. And so I was working with children with severe autism, with really challenging behaviour, on a daily basis, smearing, violence, aggression. And started to understand how best to approach that, and taking a very focused psychological perspective, and just loved it. I've always been interested in emotions, and so I did my master's on, I was thinking about it, emotional development of children with complex needs. And, it started from there, and, did my teaching, and then went on to this journey of saying, actually, I really want to retrain and become a clinical psychologist. And so that's how it started. And, during my professional work, I've worked in multiple settings, paediatrics, inpatient wards with children with and young people with severe mental health, learning disabilities and autism. Worked in CAMS, doing a lot of diagnostic work. And now more recently, I'm working with children who are in the looked after system. So children who have had complex and chronic developmental neglect and trauma. And for me, that is really interesting because it's led me into kind of specialising in the work that I'm doing now. And that's been very informative because by understanding how the brain works and how that's developed very early on in infancy and childhood, we can understand children's behaviours and manifestations of their distress much better. So that's kind of where I'm at really at the moment. I think I've answered your question. Yeah, is that?
Yeah, and I just think that the combination of your kind of teaching and academic background and your deep psychological training and then experience is what makes you and what you're going to share today so much more powerful, because I think you understand not only from a psychological perspective, but how that then shows up in the classroom and in terms of our children's learning and development.
Yeah.
And I think particularly for my listeners today, I think as we dig into this, that's what they'll see come across. And as I said in the introduction, when I first spoke to you, Sarah, I was genuinely blown away by your insights and your depth of knowledge. And I've been lucky enough to kind of have a lot of psychologists in my network, but I've never heard anybody approach emotional well-being in the way that you have. So yeah, can't wait to dive into this. And I'm curious about, obviously you've got this extensive experience of supporting children and their families with their emotional and psychological well-being. But I'm curious to what you've noticed in your practice this year in 2020 with kind of COVID and the pandemic. Are there any themes or patterns that you're noticing?
Well, thank you for your lovely comments. I feel like I've got a big head. Thank you. That's lovely. Interestingly, the last couple of years, I've been routinely, clinical psychologists wouldn't go into schools, but I've been requested more and more to be going in and working with children who are bounced back by CAMS. So what you're seeing is these trends of children with manifesting these difficulties and teachers and parents knowing that there's issues there, but it's not seen as a mental health problem. And I find that really interesting. And now that we're coming in we're not really coming out of it, are we really? But with the pandemic, there's been a massive impact. I was looking at research actually around this, and we can actually put this on your links afterwards, but there's a report that looks at schools' responses to COVID-19 and the challenges that schools are facing. The gap between disadvantaged pupils and their peers is up by 46%. Now, I think that's astonishing.
Wow. And when they're saying a gap, what's the gap? What is that gap in?
So this is between children who are disadvantaged. So these are children who come from impoverished backgrounds and their peers. So it's even widening even more, which is really, really concerning.
So is that their learning and their development?
So it's everything, their emotional, social, development. And also teachers. So these are people, they know what they're seeing. I think we really need to give credit to teachers because, it's so difficult for them. They're expecting to be a teacher, a support worker, a counsellor, a social worker, carer, all these kind of professional roles, which they haven't got the training for. And teachers reporting that 44% of their pupils need intensive catch-up support. So, out of this, we're seeing, collateral damage here. And so it's very important that we're thinking very focusedly and sensitively how we support children.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify, because you've mentioned CAMS a couple of times. For those that may not be familiar with CAMS, would you just explain what the acronym means? And
oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. So in the UK, but this will be, worldwide, but in the UK, CAMS is our mental health service for children and adolescents. And typically these were children who would be seen by CAMS, but so by a CAMS professional would be people who are exhibiting either neurological difficulties, so, children with autism or ADHD, and children with mental health, so, extreme anxiety and depression, really, which is affecting their everyday functioning. And, with eating disorders and suicidal ideation. And really, schools are quite poorly equipped to deal with this. And this is why we're seeing so many children having problems and there not being adequate services to meet the demand.
Brilliant. Thank you for clarifying that. So in terms of, from your perspective, this increase of kind of 44%, what do you think is kind of fueling that? Is it that they're being more in isolation? They haven't had their social contact? Is it, the general anxiety that's in our kind of culture at the moment around this? Is it kind of increased screen time? What do you think has been feeding it?
Oh, Nikki, I think it's all of those, really. I think it's very complex to kind of get around it. So you've got pockets of children, really. You've got children who have actually been affected by COVID through grieving. They've lost someone. So, that's massive. The trauma related to that is devastating. So you've got those types of children. So you've got children also who've experienced trauma, or had neglectful experiences in their past. So, they're not near their safe adult because we're having to respond in different ways to children in our care now. All that social distancing and a lack of that close contact has got to stop. We've got children with learning needs. So, you think of children who, might find maths quite difficult, whereas the anxiety, and we can talk about the brain if you want to and how this operates, but actually learning in these environments now has become more and more difficult and heightening for children. And actually social connotations as well. So children can't freely mix with children in the playground. So they're in these bubbles. And actually, I heard from one family that they're really upset because their two little boys, they can't play with each other on the playground because they're in different social bubbles, because I think they're in different key stage classes, and just having that connection with each other. And, hey, I'm okay, and we'll see mummy later or whatever, or, how's things going. That's stopped. So actually a lot of this is fueling this. And also now the environment's become very uncertain and very unpredictable. So we're seeing long queues and irregular washing. So it's very anxiety provoking, and also teachers are very stressed, and that, they're wearing all these, face masks. And so that eye contact and that connectivity is being reduced because there's a restriction. And so all that adds into it. So there's lots and lots of factors that feed into anxiety. It's not a one description that fits all. There's lots of multiple factors. And that's why, when we think about things psychologically, it is quite complex because it's so abstract. But worryingly, also the children that are more robust and who, routinely do well, they're being affected as well. These are the children that we would call securely attached from an attachment theory perspective. So these are the children who have predictable and consistent and nurturing relationships with their parents or their caregivers. These are the children who predominantly do well, but actually now they're taking on a lot of their adult fears. So, children, thinking about, am I going to contact it? Am I going to give it to my grandparents? Am I going to give it to my parents? How do I take responsibility for this? What is it my responsibility to wash hands? All these kind of questions that revolve around that. How do I show people that I care for them if I can't touch them or be with them? We've seen the really sad pictures of I think which the Duchess of Cambridge has done, hasn't she, about just sort of capturing the emotional experiences through COVID, and grandparents not being able, seeing their grandchildren through glass, and how to express that. So these have all got connotations, haven't they?
Yeah, and it's just making me think as you were talking then that my goddaughter lost her dad when she was 3 years old, and she's now 9, And she's recently, really struggled going into school. And when it comes down to it, she's really scared that she's going to lose her mum. And she's like, what happens if I bring COVID home from school and you get it and you die? And you're like, how they're processing that in their brains.
You see this a lot as well. I've seen this a lot in clinics where you do get some children who are very securely attached. I think sometimes we ignore this. Our work is very focused on the sort of demonstrable behavioural issues, but actually a lot of children. So, and that's why the work that I do with Calm Brain is focused on all children, because there are some children who just swallow their anxiety and it becomes internalised. So you see that there's certainly in my clinical practice, and I was talking to a colleague the other day about it, and she was saying it about it as well, that we're seeing an increase in children and parents reporting medical problems, so like tummy aches and toileting issues. I'm really interested in toileting, actually. I think it tells us a lot about sort of children's internal emotional state. But these are all and headaches, these are all manifestations of anxiety. But going back to what you were just originally saying about your goddaughter, I'm so sorry about that. And this is a tricky point to talk about, but it's interesting. I think it can be quite illustrative that you can have children who ruminate, and I think also during this, and teachers and TAs who are supporting children, or carers are supporting children, need to be very mindful of this, that children, it's their worldview, isn't it? And how they take on and absorb our anxiety. So if we keep talking to children and not be very aware of how to effectively, what I would call regulate, calm children down, we can unintentionally make things worse by ruminating. I remember that I worked with one little boy who was absolutely paranoid and really it was affecting his everyday functionality, that his parents were going to die in a car crash. And so we have to think very carefully about this, what they're being exposed to on screens and what they're hearing and the dialogues, because this is very alarming. We live in a very alarming, heightened world that we know that media uses headlines to sell news. How is that absorbed by children? And I think through COVID, we've seen that. Actually, the death rates, the death toll, it's very alarming to children to be in that kind of space, really.
So that's why, Sarah, when we first spoke, I was literally blown away by your perspective on this, because and what you believe is the root cause and the best way to support children that might be experiencing some of the issues that we're talking about in terms of their emotional well-being. Could you share with my listeners kind of the background on your perspective and how you came to that approach, please?
So in my job, I have the wonderful benefit of just watching children. So it might seem that we're not doing anything, but actually when you watch children, observe children, you can see a lot, taking in their body language and their facial expressions. And so it's my belief that the majority of children don't have mental health problems. But what I do believe is that we're seeing children with anxiety and stress. And that's due to multiple reasons, due to, sort of social media, due to screen time, due to increase, just heightening in society, really. We as mums just live such a fast-paced life. And that has an impact. We don't live in sort of idyllic Enid Blyton world. So children are constantly in this heightened state, and that has an impact on the brain. So that's their world, that's their experience. And I've just alluded to that previously. So if you think about it from a child's perspective, if they're stressed and anxious, their behaviour and their body will react in a certain way. Or if they're heightened or they're excited, there's this body-mind connection. And sometimes what we're seeing is a disconnect, and it's understanding this disconnect. And so sometimes it's very difficult for adults to interpret that in the right way. So I've often seen children rocking or, fidgeting in classrooms or wherever. And that could be seen as a behavioural issue or a disruptive issue, or, them being difficult or, whatever. But actually, if we understand the root of it, could it be a different way of looking at it? And actually, this child is trying to regulate or calm themselves down. So if we keep going down talking therapies route and not be skilled in identifying what the child needs, we kind of starting to create more anxiety. I had one little girl who's adopted and who her first months of life was, quite traumatic. But then she was adopted and she's got the most lovely mum. And I see this regularly with foster carers and adopted parents. They're very well trained. They have a lot of really good support. And so if we keep saying to them that it's an attachment perspective, you haven't got this right attachment, you haven't got this right relationship, how does that feed into the relationship of that parent and child? And also from the child's perspective, if we keep talking about how are you feeling, how's things going for you, what's your relationship with their mom, and that's their experience, and they don't know what that's grounded in, where do they go with that? Aren't we just creating more and more, suggestive thinking? And so if we understand, okay, if we need to try and help this child to communicate or to attend to a lesson or to attend to me, first thing we need to do is to calm them down. So what we're talking about and my work with Calm Brain, it gets the child, it prepares the child to be in a better state to be able to attend and focus. Because how the brain operates and functions is that when a child is stressed or anxious, the brain literally shuts down. We want a child's higher brain, their cognitive, their cortex to be open. And when that's open, the child is able to reflect, it's be able to be spontaneous, creative, it's alert, it's ready to learn. But when a child is stressed or anxious from whatever reason or heightened, the brain starts to shut down, because the whole purpose of the brain is to keep us in survival mode, is to keep us safe. So whatever's happening, the brain will accommodate that. So, a tiger's not in a room, we don't live in those days, but the child might be having the same neurological response when an adult's saying, what's this maths question, or what are you doing, or how are you feeling? Brain will just shut down. Does that make sense? So
it makes absolute sense.
It's not helpful. We need to get that brain wide open in that lovely, rich cognitive state, be able to absorb their environment. And so that's why I feel very passionate about enabling children to be in that more regulated state.
And that's what I found so fascinating and really exciting, actually, about your work, Sarah, is that clearly talking therapies have their place and they're fundamental for people's mental health. But what I'm hearing you say is just really that granularity about, let's just be really conscious about where we're using and what impact it is having. And your experiences from watching children and noticing how best to support them, that talking therapy is not always on their own leading to the impact that we want. And I think this is what led you to kind of do more research, didn't it? And really explore around, as you say, how do we get our children's brains regulated so that they can have their kind of emotional and behavioural well-being?
Yeah, and so Dr. Perry has been really pivotal in my work, my recent work, and my understanding around this. So he talks about to make any change, we need sensory input. And so to make change to the neural network, it's repetitive, rhythmic, sensory-rich information that needs to go in. So if you think about children, it's like learning a language, if they need to learn, any type of language, or if they're learning language as a little one, we do it repetitively, don't we? We would do it in a sing-songy voice, hello, and over time the child will respond and say hello, and they learn language that way. So if we're thinking about children and how they respond in their environments, in their learning environments or at home, it's got to be, so anything needs to be repetitive. So that nurturing a response needs to be repetitive throughout the day or throughout over time, really, and on that continuity. And so with COVID, that is being disrupted, because that regulatory touch or that warm response of going down to a child, that's all changing, isn't it? So the neural networks and that sort of how a child's brain is being developed is being disrupted, really, and having a different type of social connection, which we need to be mindful of.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned the calm brain approach a couple of times. I'd love it if you could share with my listeners actually what this is and what it does, because I think this is the really powerful piece. And if you also wouldn't mind, Sarah, sharing how this came to be in terms of noticing the brain development, because I know when we spoke originally, you shared with me about actually right from when children are born, some of the things that we now do in a modern world that are very different to what we may have done even 20, 30 years ago, and the impact that might be having on some of our emotional regulation.
Yeah, so in my work locally and sort of in the region, I was really concerned about a couple of children that wasn't having any intervention or any focus work, and they were going down what I believe was the wrong route, which, with a lot of children, they're sort of referred for an autistic assessment, and I didn't believe that these children had autism. But that's very difficult because I knew that there was something, the teachers and the parents were communicating very clearly that they were having difficulty with these children. And so, as I said before, when you observe children, when you see that and you have that opportunity, you can actually see that there's these patterns, there's trends. And I was seeing these patterns and trends in multiple settings. And one of these trends was thinking about how children move. And that's what Calm Brain is based around. Now, I'm really passionate about movement and the development of how that happens. I think I mentioned early on that, one of my main areas of interest is child development. And so thinking about experiencing in utero and those early infant, that time span from early infancy to childhood. And what we know and what research shows to us is that movement grows the brain. It's absolutely pivotal for the developing brain. And so in modern culture, what we're having is that a lot of that is restricted. So children are not having that free ability to move. So if you think about a child in utero, what are they doing? They're moving very freely, and then they're born. And so their first experiences is that they have to fight gravity. They can't move when they're born. And that process starts. And the first thing that is developed when a child is born is their brainstem, their lower brain, which keeps them in that survival mode. And so this works in harmony, and how the movement develops the brain and the nervous system is absolutely critical to how we think about children's presentation today. So things that restrict children's movement is car seats and buggies and walkers. Children are not having those early experiences of just freely moving, and also the health and safety issues. We don't really put children on the floor now. So children need to go through this developmental phase where they're on their tummy. That's why tummy time is so important. Stretching of the neck, rolling over and crawling. And what I was seeing in the children that I was working with, that actually there were issues with movement. And so in one of the questions in one of the autism assessments is did your child freely move and crawl? And that fascinated me because a lot of children with difficulties didn't have that experience of crawling. And now what crawling does is help the brain, that cross-lateral movement helps the brain to switch between the right and left hemispheres. And these experiences are absolutely critical to how the brain becomes wired. And so thinking about that and thinking about how we've restricted movement, we've restricted children's experiences due to just modern society and maybe through neglectful experiences or through trauma or through issues that have come upon a family, these all have an impact. And so I was trying to think, well, is this better explained to what we're seeing today? So I've talked a lot in our time together about a worldview. So if you think about that, a child wouldn't necessarily understand those early experiences because it becomes part of their their neurological process and how their nervous system becomes developed. So thinking about a child in a classroom, if a child hasn't had those regulatory experiences built in, what happens is that the nervous system becomes unbalanced. And so for me, a better way of explaining anxiety or difficulties is more about this alarm system. And I talk a lot about, in what I write and in the conferences that I do, about children having an overactive stress response system. If the central nervous system isn't properly balanced through these optimal experiences in early infancy, and that then children in modern day life are being overactivated through screen time and games and, just how we live our life in this fast pace, you're going to have children in this heightened state. And then just linking back to what we said previously, children in a heightened state, what's not open? Their cortex is not open because they're heightened, they're stressed, their brain will respond to that and keep in the lower areas of the brain. And so what we're seeing is that children, so when we think about talking therapies or parents and carers and teachers and TAs talking to children, they're working in an emotional and a nurturing way, but actually they're not working or thinking about that lower area of the brain, calming that down. So if you understand how the brain is developed, they're going too high. And so they're not getting down to the real depths of the lower brain. Calm that down. Then children are in a much better state of responding to what they're witnessing or seeing or experiencing in a classroom environment or in a home environment. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. And so you've come to develop this calm-based approach, which is kind of a movement-based intervention, isn't it, that's used in classrooms with schools?
Yeah, so it happened accidentally on purpose, really, which is a kind of a cute way of describing it, but it did, honestly. Worried about some of these children. So I knew, linking back to what we just talked about these movements and these really important movements that children have to do, these rhythmic movements that babies and infants experience. When I was seeing children rocking, they're kind of going back, they're emotionally regressing to this state. That's what I was intrigued about. And actually in the classroom environment, they're not allowed to do that because it's disruptive. So children were communicating to their teachers or their carers, I need this, but we were actually, again, restricting and stopping it. So I was thinking, well, let's give these children an opportunity to do this. So that's how my Calm Brain came about, which is, very short movements, like 2 minutes that teachers do at key transition points. Transition's very difficult for children because, again, it's that unpredictability, that unknowing, what's happening. When children are in the moment, they're okay. But when children have to, project their thinking, that's when anxiety, that monster comes about. So we would do a Calm Brain movement at key points within the day. It only takes 2 minutes. And we're seeing, actually, the response that we're seeing is overwhelming. In fact, the team have just told me now that a school has got in contact saying, "Oh, please, get it up and running. We desperately need it up and running. We need it to access." And we gave it free to all our parents through COVID because the desire to have it was so great, really.
And I'll put the links to it in the show notes, Sarah, because I think it would be amazing for people to take a look on your website and have a look at it.
Yeah.
For the purpose of this conversation, obviously the calm-based brain approach is for in schools. But I think all of the theory and the extensive research that you've done in terms of mapping all of the kind of neurological connections and what that means in terms of movement is just mind-blowing. But if we take it back to what does that mean for a working mum that's listening to this, and how can we as mothers best support our children, particularly at the moment?
Yeah. And, so I was... Sorry, you want to hear what I would suggest?
Yeah,
sorry to cut you off then. So school children have to go to school, don't they? And I think we were saying the other day or before, it's difficult because, children might not want to go to school, but they've got to go the next day. And the next day it's a very real reality to us. And, Yeah, thinking about, so what would be helpful for you, Nikki, for your readers, not readers, for your listeners? Is it kind of strategies to help me think about how I can support your listeners?
Yeah, so we'd spoken, my son is somebody that normally runs into school, loves it. He's kind of, can I go to breakfast club? Can I go to after school club? But we've had a couple of mornings where he's literally cried at the school gates and not wanted to go in. And actually, it shocked me because I felt really, unprepared for it because it came out the blue, or it felt like it came out the blue. And also really unresourced to what do I do in this moment? Because in that moment, your child's got to go into school. So there's that logical part of your brain, but then the emotional kind of mother instinct is my child's distressed. I can't even walk them into their classroom because of COVID. And I'm wondering if parents are experiencing either that at the school gates or at the end of the school day, their child presenting with issues that they think, there's anxiety here, or, we're noticing some behavioural changes. What can we do as parents to help with that emotional regulation?
Well, I think, so I'm going to answer this in two parts if I can. I think to support them at home, I think it's really important that home is seen as a safe place. And we've talked at the beginning about the importance of, that predictability and consistency and that nurturing approach, which helps children to feel more securely attached. So, get children outside, enjoying natural environments. There's loads of research that supports how the natural environment being outside is really regulating and really calming and supports emotional mental health for children. So I'd be really advocating that. And National Trust does wonderful things, which really enriches all of our lives. So that's one thing that I'd really be strongly suggesting. So coming away from screen time, screen time, they might look calm, they might look relaxed, but remember what we've just been talking about, this heightening, games and whatever, I'm really not into this kind of stuff, I'm really against it, but, the games, their means is to get children to be addicted to it. So they do that through that stress response, what I've just talked about, it's really interesting. Actually, someone showed me at work the other day something on YouTube, which I found fascinating about watching people be scared in the moment, but which is what your stress response system does. And this is what thinking about children. So, they were like adults with like a snake on them, and they were filming their response. And so the adult knew they were safe because they're filming and everyone's around them laughing, but they're absolutely terrified that they've got this snake on them. And, and so we laugh at that because we know we're safe, but it's frightening. And Scary Movies does the same kind of thing, doesn't it? You know you're safe because you're in the comfort of your home. Sitting next to your partner with, nibbling something, but you're terrified what you're seeing on screen. So if you think about, that's what games do, and that's why they're addictive, because actually we like that response. We like being stressed, that sympathetic nervous system, that feeling of, I'm scared. But what happens is the parasympathetic nervous system, that calming down comes in, and that's what's nice. And that's why we like, people do adrenaline seeking things, I don't know, like bungee jumping, whatever. I'm really not into that, but that's what people do. So it's thinking about that. We want parents to be activating children's parasympathetic nervous system, their calming system. So things like being outside, lots of cuddles, lots of nurture, talking to your teenagers, being with them, just listening to them, being empathetic and seeing it from their perspective, just seeing it from their worldview, seeing it from their developmental perspective. Young people, they haven't got, I know they have lots of access on social media, but their world is still very limited because, they've only had, 15, 16 years on the planet. That's how much they have. So it's about being really tuned and empathetic. And, I see you, I hear you, I get you. And I think that's really, really important. I remember one young person being very distressed in clinic with me saying, and it really stuck with me saying, it really saddens me that I frustrate and I irritate my mum so much. I don't know why. And that was just so helpful to me because, often children don't, or young people don't, because a lot of it, we're fighting our own issues. And I think if parents can hold on to that, don't bring your baggage into your relationship with your child. Be very mindful of that. Be very mindful of your parenting and what you're bringing. Hold on to your anxiety because it breeds, it catches, and, it just is a spiral of negativity. And so spending time with your child, less screen time. Think about, what I said before, that enabling, go back to just a natural way of being, the simplicity of life, really. I think.
Sorry, Sarah. I interrupted you there, Karen.
Yeah, no, I'm on a roll. Let me keep going. I think also giving young people lots of opportunities and children to experience, and that's part of Calm Brain as well, positive emotions. So, we talk a lot about joy, amusement, interest, these serenities, giving them that, because we know the research shows that positive emotions develop positive experiences, and that's what we want our children, our young people to have, through this pandemic. There's opportunity to have it as a positive experience because we're all together. There's that lovely feeling of solidarity and connective. And I think, Boris Johnson's really trying to do that, isn't he? A lot of his speeches about, we can do this, we can fight it. And the Queen's speech, I remember she talked about, we will get through this together. That solidarity and that being together and coming together. And that's all about, when you start looking at that psychologically, that's, attachment theory in its truest forms.
And it's interesting, Sarah, as I'm hearing you talk, it's really making me think about when my son got upset at the school gates, how it triggered my stress response.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
I was like, oh my God, firstly, it came as a shock. So then I was like, I don't know what to do here. I was stressed because I was concerned that he was upset. Then I was stressed going, oh my gosh, I'm on such a time scale here. I need to get him into school to get to where I'm going. And literally, that's where I felt really unresourceful, because I struggled in that moment to emotionally regulate myself to then be able to help him with his emotional regulation. And I just wanted to share that, because I think what you've said there about actually knowing that how we're feeling is a big part of this. And I know that sometimes I can project my own kind of irritation at the day, and that can feed into the situation. And I just want anybody that's listening to go, you know what, if you're a mum that's being irritable at the moment, don't beat yourself up.
We're all victims of that, because as we said through this podcast, we're victims of modern life, aren't we? It's fast paced, isn't it? I can't believe it's October. Already, we're victims of that rat race. But I think, if your listeners can take away, what I talked about with the brain, get it back to that neocortex, get your front brain open by calming yourself down. Use your rational thinking of, hey, I'm not making the situation better. It's not going to go away. I'm just going to make it worse. I'm calmed. If I'm calm, my child, I'm more likely to be able to calm my child or my young person.
Yes.
Really, really important, isn't it, really?
And one of the things that, because I found this year that my stress response has just been triggered so much more, and I can really easily, particularly at bed and bath time when I'm getting tired, I'm more emotionally reactive myself. And I have to, there's a brilliant book by Izzy Judd called Mindfulness for I think it's for mums. And she's got this thing where, and I try and practice it as much as I can when I feel like this. And she just gets you to squeeze your index finger and your thumb together, then your middle finger and your thumb, and then your kind of wedding finger and your thumb, and then your little finger and thumb, and say each time, calmness starts with me. And I really try and remember that, because I know that I can fuel a situation by my own emotional reactivity. And I think talking to my community, a lot of mums are feeling in that place where they felt burnt out trying to be a working mum through a pandemic and not able to actually regulate themselves to regulate their children. But I'm hearing that is like the critical, almost first step in this.
Yeah, I think actually you saying that, one of the movements is it does that actually. It's really beautiful, because we have different phases on Calm Brain. So that's one of the phase ones, which works with a really deep lower brain of that. We call it state regulation. It's literally not, talking to your mums now, it's literally calming yourself internally. And if you think about it, you think about a balance scale, and you're trying to calm that nervous system down. And, something that I talk to parents about all the time is, especially bedtime is really activating, because, you're really tired yourself, aren't you? You just want to have some time out. Or if you're a working mum, often, when the kids are in bed, you're working yourself. So it's very, very difficult. But actually, if you think about it, the quicker you try and get them into bed, your anxiety, it just makes it longer.
It's so counterproductive, isn't it? Yeah.
You're desperate to get them to sleep or whatever. But actually thinking, right, I'm going to give you 20 minutes of story time or connectivity time. And we're going to have this really rich moment-to-moment connection so that I can get you in that state to transition into bed. And what they just want you. And I think for me, that's one of the most important things I talk to my parents about, and you know, the carers that I work with, and, you know, parents who are trying to, you know, heal and repair their relationships with their children is, you know, the most traumatized child that I work with across the board, the most neglected and traumatized child, or the most, you know, wonderful child who, you know, in terms of having the most wonderful relationship with their parent, we all want our parents. And I think that's really important for us to hear. You know, they don't particularly really maybe want their siblings, but they do want their parents. You know, we want that connectivity. And the most traumatized children that I work with, and, you know, knowing them as when they grow up into adults, you know, often the things that they just really struggle to overcome and get their head around is the attachment that they had with their parents, and it's just so devastating. So I think it's about parents being very mindful in that moment. My child needs me, and I need them, because we're developing a relationship, aren't we, that has longevity, and it's very beautiful. And I feel very passionate about that, about empowering families to work together.
And I think that's a really beautiful place to end, Sarah, because I think you've really summed up not only the challenges, but also at the heart of it, what the solution is. So where can people find out more about you and your work? And I can put the links into our show notes, so don't worry about having to spell stuff out.
Oh, bless you. Oh, that's very sweet. I suppose that the best place to find me would be on so there's all my clinical work, but, you know, that's obviously a very protective space for me. But Calm Brain is, you know, my work that's very much in the public forum. So it would be on the Calm Brain Approach website, and the work that's attached to that. So I can give you, you've got that email.
Yes, so I'll add in your email and your website link for that. And I would absolutely encourage people to go and check it out and watch some of the videos, because they're not only fascinating to watch the movement patterns, but to have it explained how you've developed those, what seem, it's almost like a dance movement, but to understand the careful kind of neurological and psychological research that sits behind it, I think is incredibly powerful.
The intricacies of the movement, and how that we're specifically trying to address specific areas of neurological need. I feel very passionate about that. And then we've got, you know, this Facebook and stuff like that as well, isn't there?
Yeah, so I'll add all those links in. But Sarah, just to say thank you, because I know how incredibly busy you are doing what I believe is some of the most important work in this world, you know, helping to kind of support our next generation to flourish, really. So thank you for taking the time, sharing your wisdom and the Calm Brain approach with us.
Thank you. It's been really good.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.